Hello everybody and welcome to Tartarian Tales 29. We've got a new book here which is pretty sweet from September 1930 by Owen Lattimore, who traveled through High Tartary in the northern Russia area with his wife and came across some amazing adventures, some incredible insight, and saw a lot of amazing things, met a lot of great people, and this will be another book that I will definitely go into from time to time. But there's one particular chapter I am going to read for you all about lost cities, so that should be interesting. But I also found this image, which might be the seal in the deal, convincing everybody that the ruins in the west were actually ruins. This Turfan area is known as the Death Valley of Asia. And they have things like this that look just like Monument Valley all over the place, and they are referred to as ruins officially at this time period. So another thing we have been lost at, another thing we had a good feeling about and we're probably definitely right about, and this is just a little exploration of that area. So here is chapter 15, The Land of Lost Cities. We were now traveling in a new style. My wife and I had saddle ponies while Moses traveled more slowly in a two-wheeled turkey cart with our kitchen battery and a few effects. My wife rode a splendid black which we had just purchased in Urumqi, while I rode a raking bay lent to me by Mr. Pan, a friendly attention which can only be fully appreciated by owners of horses and those who have traveled in Central Asia. Pan Suli is a traveler of contemporary fame in Chinese Turkestan. The Chinese official proceeding from one post to another travels usually with all the dignity and leisure possible, even if comfort is hard to achieve. With Mr. Pan, however, every journey is a succession of forced marches. Before returning from Aksu to Urumqi, he had brought a choice company of ponies. Putting his light baggage on pack ponies and accompanied only by 3 or 4 attendants, he had ridden the journey in double and treble stages. There were ponies of fine quality, for not one of them had been abandoned on the way. The pony lent to me, although bred in the famous Kara Shar district, had an unmistakable Russian strain. It was not Mr. Pan's own mount, not having the ta tsao or great amble, the most fashionable gait. It had a racking trot, but for long marches was trained to the sao tsao or small amble, than which nothing can be more comfortable. It was characteristic of Mr. Pan that he did not tell me what a valuable pony he had lent me. Months later at Aksu I heard this pony described and was asked if I knew anything of it, for it had apparently won an all-comers 2-mile race. That the pony should have been lent to me for a ride to Turfan was enough to enhance my dignity. This is one of the jolliest things about Central Asia, the way you will hear the points of a pony discussed when he is hundreds of miles away, and the way that your having seen or ridden him establishes you as a friend among strangers. The stranger, to be sure, is rarely more of a personage than a private soldier dressed in rags, with an undischargeable rifle, but he can do a lot for you on the road. The dawn was chilly and fresh at the 3 springs, but with a dryness in the air giving no promise that the freshness would last. No sooner had the sun come up than the hot light struck us like a blow, and the blow became a steady increasing pressure that crushed one to the hot, sullen stones. Beyond the verge of the springs, there was no more sign of any life at all, not even the meager growth of stunted tamarisk that you find in the Black Gobi. It was worse than any desert I had seen in all Mongolia. Our ponies were as crushed by the heat as we, and jogged dispiritedly over the stones. Every drop of sweat dried off them by the heat pulsating above and all about and reflected from below. At sunrise a sudden wind had torn off my hat and sent it racing away at an incredible speed, until, even as we watched, it was torn apart on the stones. I had nothing to put on my head but a thin handkerchief, but though the dry heat wilted us both, body and marrow, I had no signs of a sunstroke. The road took us a full 30 miles over this waste. Insane mirages jerked and jumped all about us. At times the horizon broke into bays and inlets of unreal water. At other times illusory hills, trees, and travelers hovered in the air. The real world you did not see. Once the mirage parted a bare 50 yards or so before us, and we met a few jaded Turkey travelers on woebegone donkeys, all of them having been invisible as they approached across the open, stone-littered desert because of the shrouding heat waves. At last in the afternoon we saw the road sink before us in the flash of real, though dusty green. Either the ponies also saw the treetops, or else the scent of water reached them, for they cantered willingly, carrying us down to the first water, the first oasis, and the first inn of desert-girdled Turfan. We were now at the edge of the Piedmont zone, where water, breaking out from under the gravel, had cleft a ravine through cliffs of loess. Despite the heat, a few men were at work on an aqueduct built of halved and hollowed poplar logs, carried across the ravine on trestles. We found a rill of water in a ditch under young poplars. There my wife hung her feet in the water and her tongue on her chin, while I, going farther up, found a place where I could strip and lie down in the ditch with the shallow water sluicing over me. The heat in that boxed-in place did not abate even when the dusk came, and after it the night. After Moses and the cart had overhauled us, we ate sweltering at the inn, the single candle that lit up our grimy, mud-walled room seeming to heat the place intolerably. We lay down for a few hours of fretful rest, and at midnight rose again to begin a last march that should bring us to Turfan town itself. The air seemed still to cling about us in shifting, stifling folds, and even in the darkness one could taste dust. In a little while an old and haggard moon came up and threw a sickly light on steep-sided bluffs of clay, among which we burrowed on a dark sunken road. It was only our ponies, who shied at vague shapes and snorted at what they could not see, that kept us from falling asleep. Then the stars began to pale, dimmed by something more than the struggling light of the moon, and all at once the sultry end of night cooled in the breathing space before dawn. As the gray light spread, we came scrambling down the clay sides of a gully to cool, sweet water, and looked back and up to a wilderness of riven clay like the fragments of huge fortifications. On the other side we climbed again to more flat-topped bluffs, where we met the full dawn and saw scattered groups of trees and houses, ditches of water, and green fields broken by stretches of flat clay desert. The early morning was already hot when we reached the sanctuary of the walled city. "You are going to Turfan?" an old turkey yeoman runner and interpreter on the North Road had asked me. "Ah, Turfan, it is a good place. Clean, clean. I left it when I was a boy and have never saved the money to go back. But it is clean, clean. The streets of the bazaar are cleaner than the Kang of the Chinese. There not even the horse of a traveler can leave anything in the street without someone rushing up to tidy it." He had no higher praise. As usual, however, we found that the inn of the big town was more filthy, more smelly, and in the hands of people more impudent, lazy, and thievish than the inns of tiny halting places by the road. But even while we were lamenting the evil prospect, there sought us out a Russian Tatar. He was a merchant I had met in Urumqi, and having seen us pass through the streets, he had come to rescue us and install us in a cool turkey room, with clay walls and arched windows opening on a private court. Then, our lodging settled, we went to open our eyes, which is the admirable Chinese phrase for staring, in the bazaar or trading quarter. The walled city, in vivid contrast with the open country, is cool and green. Over the central streets, which are at once passageways and marketplaces, are trellises, covered with mats, gourd vines, and the branches of willows and poplars. In the checkered shade the people step softly, loose-robed and barefooted or slipper-shod, and as they chatter in Turkey, guttural but soft, the eyes of women flash under stenciled eyebrows and teeth of men flash from black beards. From wells and ditches at the city gates of battlement, mud little boys drive innumerable donkeys carrying water pannier-wise in wooden butts to be splashed over the streets. From the time that the struggle against the heat begins in the morning until it slackens at dusk, the whole population flings water on the walls and floors of houses, on the streets, and on the vegetables for sale in little booths or spread out on the clean streets. Although we splashed water copiously on the walls of our room, it dried in a few minutes. The streets, thus constantly moistened and padded with bare feet and slapped with slippers, do indeed become beautifully smooth and clean. The shopping hour is over by 9 in the morning. After that, riding along the empty streets, one may see only in the recesses of the shops figures seated cross-legged, magnificently set off by the muted glow of carpets and bright wares in dark corners, poised in that most commanding sloth which goes by the name of Oriental dignity. Through deserted gateways one gets a glimpse here of the carved wooden galleries and plaster domes of mosques, there of caravanserais, with courtyards walled about with bales of cotton and populated by somnolent donkeys. To break the spell of this daylight trance, one has only to produce a camera. At once appears one of those small boys who are the forerunners of crowds all the world over. Then another small boy abandons his donkey load of street assuaging water, and with whooping and capering musters the full citizenry. Hajis who have seen Mecca, but not a camera in action. Traders who would not walk 10 yards to close a deal, but will run 50 to be in at the taking of a picture. bold maidens, jaunty youths to elbow the maidens, and ecstatic matrons whose bliss would be complete if somebody would elbow them. The turkeys of Turfan town, by reason of their nearness to Urumqi in the coming and going of Chinese traders, have many of them a knowledge of Chinese. With the power of speech with the ruling race, they have lost much of the deferential timidity of the main Turkey population towards Kashgar. Their excitement, however, does not tend to get out of hand in turn, as that of a street crowd on the North Road sometimes will, into furtive mobbing. The front ranks readily understood when we wanted to clear space for the cameras, and tried to give it to us, but nothing could be done with a crowd 50 yards deep and steadily agglomerating, who could not hear our words. We had in fact to go out usually on horseback and to take most of our photographs from the saddle, an exciting recreation in which it was always touch and go whether one gets the picture taken first or whether the unfailing small boy, diving under the belly of one's pony at the last moment in hope of a better view, sends him panicking for 40 yards through cabbages, cook shops, and babies. My wife was a center of the most fervid interest. We were several times told that she was the first white woman ever seen in Turfan. She never went through the streets except at the head of a procession. For all that, the natural manners of the people were delightful. When we tried to buy a saddlebag of soft lop nor wool, picked out with bright colors and bands of angular designs, such a saddlebag as is brought occasionally from the most remote corner of Chinese Turkestan by trade routes only intermittently in use, a reverend Haji was elected with astonishing rapidity to preside over a committee of purchase. The committee settled a fair price without further reference to us or the shopkeeper, took the money from us and gave the bag from him, and exchanged them with deliberate gravity. Fee to the Haji, 1 photograph, the multitude holding back with arrested breath while it was taken. Turfan town is the head of all the towns and villages of the Turfan Depression. It stands just south of the Fire Mountains, a line of red hills which mark a geological fault at the foot of the Piedmont slope from the main Bogdo-Ola range. At this fault, the water of the high mountains reappears from its burial under the slopes of gravel, and flowing through gorges in the red hills, emerges into the Turfan Depression. The water of each stream is dispersed over the plain through ditches, while between the streams and beyond the limit to which their water can be carried, the farmers depend on kares, a Persian irrigation device imported to Turfan only at the end of the 18th century. Kares are wells dug in series to tap an underground flow of water. Each well is sunk until it strikes water, and by tunneling from the bottom of each well to the next, a distance of only 20 or 30 feet, an underground canal, or rather sewer, is constructed. The mouth of the wells serve as approaches from which the sewer can be cleaned. The wells decrease in depth from the direction of the mountains out into the plain, until at last the water is brought to the surface and runs into a ditch. Huntington, 20 years ago, estimated the population of the entire Turfan Basin at about 50,000, of whom about 20,000 depended wholly on Kara's water. Beyond the area of Kara's irrigation, the bottom of the Turfan Depression becomes too saline and swampy for human habitation. Turfan town stands at about sea level. The lowest level of the hollow goes down some 300 feet below sea level at the evanescent lake of Bojanti, which holds a measure of water in winter, but only mud in summer. An ascent to the far rim of the hollow then begins, with a belt of Piedmont gravel rising to a desert range in the unexplored deserts that reach all the way to Kansu. In ancient times, though, the use of kares was unknown. The climate of Turfan must have been much more favorable, according, at least, to the cogent arguments of Huntington, the protagonist of the theory that climatic variation must be used as the key to understanding the cyclical waxing and waning of civilization in this inner region of Central Asia. He points out that even now, with the added resort of the kares, which supports about 40% of the population, the limits of agriculture are more restricted than they were in the remote past, and the total population cannot by any reckoning be as great as it then was. The water supply must have been greater then, and it must have been possible to carry the water farther than it is now carried by kares, as is proved by the numerous ruins beyond the zone in which cultivation is now possible by the aid of kares. About the beginning of the Christian era, there existed in the Turfan Basin, as in the greater Lop or Tarim Basin, a much denser population, of a high civilization. Then came several centuries of drought. Ice caps in the far mountains receded, rivers withered away, and the population dwindled. The steady relapse from the high point of culture in the period just antecedent to the birth of Christ was varied by intervals of partial recovery. At the end of the first millennium AD, Islam was implanted in Central Asia, and thereafter the arts and letters, in all but the thinnest shadow of the memory of the old opulent Buddhist culture, were utterly forgotten. In Turfan, a period of climatic amelioration at a comparatively late period flowered in a second civilization of the highest significance, for it was a point of fusion to the cultures of many lands and peoples of varying traditions. To this period belongs a secondary series of ruins. Kara Koja, the largest of the ruined towns, was founded 874 and 913 AD and existed until 1644 I-644 AD, or later. In its days, Turfan was renowned for its library, its art, and its craft, as well as its might in war. An examination of the languages, from manuscripts on paper, leather, and wood recovered from the ruins, shows how, when favorable climatic conditions caused Turfan to become capable of supporting a dense population, people poured in from every quarter. Speakers of Nagari and of two dialects of Brahmi came from India on the southwest. Tibetans and Tanguts brought their language from the southeast. Chinese from the east, Uyghurs and Turks from the northeast, north, and northwest, while from the west came people who were preferably Nestorian Christians and who brought the Syriac and Manichaean tongues and an unknown language allied to Syriac. The presence of Tibetan manuscripts in Turfan is especially interesting because at the end of the 8th century there was a great incursion of Tibetans into Chinese Turkestan. The underlying cause of this is not known with certainty, but apparently during the preceding dry, warm epoch, Tibet had become relatively habitable, while now, when the climate became colder, that is, when the ice caps on the high mountains advanced again, resulting in a renewed flow of water during the summer and the enclosed basins of Chinese Turkestan could once more support increased populations, the Tibetans found difficulty in raising crops or in maintaining flocks upon their high plateau, and so sought new homes. Islam entered Chinese Turkestan beginning at Kashgar about the year 1000 in the train of conquerors from the west, but though thereafter the climate revived to some extent, culture never again reached the height attained in the Buddhist era, probably because though life became easier and the population increased, the ancient trade routes were never restored to the free use they had enjoyed during what we may call the two great periods, that of the Chinese Han Dynasty in the 2nd and 1st centuries BC, and that of the Tang Dynasty, whose apogee was in the 7th century AD. To my mind, the stimulus of a great through traffic along the line of oasis kept up by the great dynasties between China and the thither west must have played a major part in developing wealth, providing an occupation for large town communities, and encouraging the growth of a superior culture. Without the stimulus of a through traffic, the natural tendency of these enclosed regions of Inner Asia, as can well be seen at the present time, is to fall into a sort of timeless, enchanted stagnation, neither decaying nor progressing. Islam deletes most of what has gone before it, but two series of links continue to bind Inner Asia to the high days of its past. One, a reliquary chain of monuments, the other, an umbilical connection of living tradition, obscure though that tradition may be. Search in the vicinity of what are now Mohammedan shrines or places of pilgrimage has never failed to show traces of older holy places in an older religion. Some of these are associated with legends of the struggles between the Mohammedan invaders and the supporters of Buddhism. The legends of some of the shrines are obscure. People worship there simply by the force of inherited veneration, because the place has been holy since time out of mind. A holy place of great fame may lie far out in a desert totally beyond redemption. The pilgrims who resort there may be ignorant of the fact that not far away are the ruins of a city once flourishing, or if they know of the ruins, they do not realize that the shrine of our time occupies the site or the neighborhood of a shrine of that obliterated city. The way in which traces of many different religions may adhere, with the passage of time, to one holy place could not better be shown than by the picture I took of a cemetery near Turfan. The domes of the graves are Mohammedan. The short straight wall built across the entranceway as an apparently needless obstruction is nothing but the Chinese Pisea Chiang, or avoidance of uncanny influences wall. The Chinese believe that ghosts and evil spirits can move only in straight lines. By putting such a wall in front of the gate of a city, private house, or cemetery, they force whoever enters to go around before getting at the gate, and evil influences are thus circumvented. The wall, in this instance, is surmounted by the skulls of wild sheep, which everywhere in this part of Inner Asia are relics of the most primitive religious instincts of the people, a witness of the shamanism or witch doctoring, which is older than even Buddhism and still survives among the nomad tribes, and can be traced among the lowland Mohammedans as well. The monuments, ruined cities, forts, and temples occupy almost exclusively sites out in the desert, on the dry courses of what were once living streams. I have described how the oases of the present day are near the end of a stream that flows down from the glaciers and high snows of the great mountains, out through a desert barrier range and into the desert, there at the end either to die in a marsh or saline lake or wither in the sand. The dead cities were once the centers of similar oases, which were abandoned because the decreasing water supply from the distant mountains failed to continue flowing so far out into the plains. Owing to the fact that the tendency to an increasingly dry climate has been on the whole progressive, the cities are found in zones or roughly parallel lines, the line farthest out being that of the cities of the golden age of Central Asian Buddhism, and the lines between it in the modern oasis representing periods of recuperation, when the streams revived and people pushed out again into the desert. Apparently none of these periods of recuperation quite equaled its predecessor, so that although sites are found where new cities were built on the foundations of cities that once had been abandoned, it is more usual to find that each dead city represented a period of its own. Once the supply of river water had ceased, the dry climate, almost as rainless as that of Egypt, allowed the fabric of silk and paper and the colors of paintings and stuccos to be preserved almost inviolate. Dry sand invaded the abandoned cities and shrouded them in a clean, mummifying sepulchra. In the places where cities were built successively, one above the other, the different strata allow the determination of dates and periods. Other cities, the nearest to the present water supply, may never have been abandoned for lack of water, but have been wiped out in war. The increase of agriculture, the extension of irrigation, and the growth of population in the last 2 generations of peaceful Chinese rule have brought a few of those places once more within the range of cultivation, so that fields reach right up to and within their crumbling walls, and digging peasants have brought to light and destroyed many of their treasures. We had planned to visit Kara Koja and perhaps other ruins that could be reached by riding out a day or 2 from Turfan, but we had not reckoned with the weather. We knew that Turfan at the end of April would be hot, but we had not reckoned on being there in the worst season of dust storms. Every day as the sun grew hot, a strong wind rose, bringing sand from the desert and lifting the loose, dry soil of the fields. Air and sky turned yellow, and to venture out of doors, even in the city, was highly unpleasant. Sometimes the wind fell at evening, but sometimes it continued into the night. As nothing can be seen in the ruined cities except mud walls crumbling above the surface, unless one digs, and we had not come to dig, to the disappointment of a large number of guides who offered themselves, we stayed only 3 days. Near the city we did see the ruins of one large town, which may have dated from the medieval Mohammedan period, but was more probably destroyed in the wars of the Mohammedan rebellion 50 or 60 years ago. The scars of its abandonment are being wiped out by tilth and harvest. The chief monumenter near it is a great brick tower, built apparently by a local ruler, Soliman, at the end of the 18th century. Like many a monument of Chinese Turkestan, it harbors holy pigeons, but we found some small boys catching pigeons in the cavernous and vault-like spaces of an abandoned mosque near the tower. They simply kept the birds fluttering through the building until, dazed by the dim light in the pillars, they cowered on the ground. A stew of holy pigeons probably tastes as good as any. When we said to our friendly host, the Tartar, that we were going away from Turfan after such a short stay and without having done the more genteel sights, he was horrified. People would know he had entertained us at Turfan. They would think he had done it poorly. We must at least picnic with him at Grape Valley. In spite of the weather, we decided to risk another day, and he started with zest on the assemblage of a picnic. So another great and unique reading from later on in time than Pinto and some of the other Tartarian tales, but just as effective because it was from a very pure time where he was able to kind of get in there and meet people and hear stories and have great insight that is very helpful now. And the fact that these ruins are so similar from this area to the way they are in Death Valley is absolutely astounding. We've been waiting for kind of evidence of that for a long time to prove that those are something and were once something great. And then you think about it, like that's Death Valley over here. Over there in the west is a whole nother area that's an absolute massive area. It would be a metropolis if those things in Monument Valley were actually buildings, which I do believe they are. And all these things just shift the weather, it keeps changing things. And how many different things on our plane, how many different regions on our immaculate flat Earth and grand, massive planet world are there? How many times does cold tropical climates turn into amazing arid ones or lush tropical ones, and vice versa? And what's the cycle for this? There's so much we don't know. Things just get buried, covered, wiped away, destroyed in war. So many different factors go into the desecration and loss of history. I also love how the author meets people who are hoping that he's going to do some digging in the local areas. And I am hoping that we all start doing it, and we need to. We have to get to the bottom of this. There should be a new form of archaeology that doesn't go for the glorification of finding treasure and riches in Egypt and dinosaurs for the Smithsonians, but goes with the clear goal of discovering our history, discovering ancient past, and finding what has been lost. We need it. Bless you all.